Hello, and thank you for calling the Higher Self Hotline, your direct line to the divine. You've been led here by your inner knowing, and you've arrived right on cue. I'm your host, Zoe Greco, and together we'll make the ethereal earthly, helping you consciously embody your spiritual knowing and most authentic self. Please listen carefully to the following options. To discover how to fulfill your soul's purpose, press 1. To unlock infinite abundance in life, love, and career, press 2. To heal your mind, body, and spirit, press 3. To speak with your personal spirit guides, press 0. Please hold while we connect you to your highest timeline. Hello, divine darlings, and welcome back to the Higher Self Hotline. I'm your host, Zoe Greco. Thank you so much for joining me today. And today is an episode that you are not going to want to miss. We have never really had an active conversation around women's place in science, the bias toward men in science, but also the cultural implications and the physical implications and ramifications of women's pleasure. And today we are joined by none other than the Verónica, who is going to be guiding us through a conversation around this. So let me tell you a little bit about our amazing guest. Verónica is a somatic practitioner centering the cyclical nature of the female nervous system. She's also a doctoral candidate at the University of California at Santa Barbara who isn't afraid to call out the male bias baked into science. She bridges ancestral paterismo womb knowledge from her community in Guanajuato, Mexico, with cutting-edge critique showing how the female nervous system need for pleasure, oxytocin, transforms the way we think about childbirth, menstruation, and menopause. At the intersection of theory and praxis, Verónica is reshaping the conversation on reproductive health, female orgasm, and nervous system regulation, moving us beyond the narrow limits of Western medicine and toward liberated embodiment. Welcome to the show. I cannot wait to have this conversation.
Thank you so much for such a beautiful and generous intro.
Of course. I'm just telling the people what's true. So I would love to understand what first called you onto this path of exploring the nervous system and pleasure and the wisdom of the body. And if there was kind of a moment where you realized that this was your medicine to share with the world, that you were the messenger of, or one of the messengers of this wisdom that needs to be shared and known.
It's been a long journey. I'm in the...
We've got time.
Yeah. I'm in the 7th year of my doctorate, and it really started way before that. And I never knew that I would get to this point. It wasn't planned. It was like this winding road, but it really started with my own chronic illness. I dealt with a muscular dystrophy autoimmune condition when I was like 22. And that was what, through that experience, forced me to think about science very critically. And I would have never chosen that path. It wasn't easy looking back, but it gave me this kind of embodied understanding about the female nervous system, although I didn't have the language back then. And I started my PhD because I just had this question that I felt like I couldn't move through life without answering. And that was, well, okay, how is it that my ancestors 2 generations ago were able to, and they were living in relative poverty. They were able to give birth very naturally. It was very easy. And it was at home and it was undisturbed and there was no, vaginal tearing or uterine prolapse or postpartum depression in the way that we see it. So how were we able to achieve that in relative poverty? And now we have so many resources and it's so challenging and there's so much fear. Those were my questions. And I just said, I think a doctorate would be like a good time to kind of, think about this and move through this. And it wasn't until pretty recently, like about 2 years ago, that I realized chronic illness, ancestral medicine, I can weave that together through the language of the female nervous system. And it's not perfect. Like the female nervous system is kind of like a very Western approach to the body. But it's a language that I feel like resonates. We're kind of coming to consciousness awareness in the West about the body. And we're just realizing, like, the body is not a machine. You can't just like tweak something or take something out and expect it to just kind of operate like a machine would. So yeah, it was about 2 years ago. I was like, oh, okay. I think that what I've been saying and what I know intuitively and ancestrally, I can convey it through the language of the female nervous system. And I can kind of use that as a space to bring in this ancestral medicine that I don't want to see disappear. So it's been a long journey, but also this realization is relatively recent for me too.
As I'm listening to you and hearing about the timing of this journey for you and the personal connections to, your own body, your own healing, your ancestry, I feel like we're in a particularly obviously volatile time, especially for women. Like I, in my life, have never felt so unsafe to exist in the world as a woman. And so I'm wondering if doing this work and doing this research at this kind of in this critical time frame where we're seeing this massive move back toward traditionalism and this attempted move back toward Christian nationalism, are you finding that you're experiencing pushback as you pursue these topics or as you try to gain deeper understanding? Because there's multiple layers to this, like the ancestral component of it and the cultural component. There's, of course, like, this erasure of cultural, ancestry, history, folk medicine that already has, been decimated by whiteness. But then on top of it, you're also exploring things that the world just perpetuates, a distance and a taboo around, which is, female pleasure. So I'm curious, as you explore these topics, there's obviously this immense courage that you have to embody to be able to pursue this information. Like, how are you experiencing pushback or limitation, or where is it hard to gain the information that you need to further your research because of, the way the zeitgeist kind of pressurizes you?
Wow. It's kind of funny because I think I spent like the first 5 years of my doctorate terrified. I really just felt like I cannot even be honest to the people closest to me about what I'm actually doing, because no one is ready to really think about the female body, the uterus, our clitoris, our organ. We're not even ready for that. So I spent a lot of time just utterly terrified. I call it like I was like fawning at life. I was just like, I felt like I needed to hide. And I think when I kind of like zoomed out and I got into this kind of deeper awareness that what I'm talking about, it can't actually be destroyed. Like it's not something that you can just erase. It's not something that's going to go away no matter how much you try. When I kind of tapped into that and I started to realize that what healed me when I was sick was my relationship to pleasure, and that is now developing like a methodology to understand that, I just dove into that. And that is what gets me through, because I realize it becomes kind of funny sometimes. Like I look at the academic literature, I look at, the ontology within obstetric science, the way they describe our bodies, and it's kind of funny. And I don't like fear it so much. I just see it as, well, this is, a natural response to the fear of the power that we have that is available to us. And when you kind of tap into that, like that rhythm that's there, I don't really see the limitations as much as I used to. I just feel like the wave, the energy that we're moving with, the momentum that we have, it's so powerful. Like you couldn't threaten it or destroy it if you tried. So, and I see the structural limitations. I see them. They're everywhere. I think I spent like the first 3 to 5 years just receiving so many rejections for fellowships and funding. It was just constant. And then I kind of just turned into this, like, I'm destined to succeed in this. I and many and hundreds others of us, we need this. And I started to just kind of get into this, like, well, what if it does pan out? Like, what if there are women who are hungry for this? And what if, now's the time? What if this is really like, and the more I got into this like delusional, but with a plan, like working with my body, working with my nervous system, supporting myself through the fear of what I'm experiencing, doors started opening that I would have never expected. I can't even explain them. The funding that appeared, the mentorship, which is critical, the resources, the femtors who are also walking this path like miles ahead of me. And now I feel really supported. And I see this kind of backlash as like kind of like their final, like last, plea. Like, this kind of like desperate, like it's kind of embarrassing. It is embarrassing to watch that. It's not just like, that's okay. You can have that, because what we're working is so deep. You could not destroy it if you tried. It's wired into who we are. All of us, every single one of us, without a doubt, came through that portal, came through the womb. So there's no book that you could write. There's no decree that you could, declare that's going to erase that.
Your answer was everything I wanted and more. I didn't even know that that's what I wanted to hear until you started saying it. And I was like, more, please, more. And, I had a similar conversation not too long ago with a friend of mine who is a queer person in the space of paranormal investigation. And we talked about how her like physical vessel, she's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful being, can be actually another layer of obstruction in like a male dominated space. And so as I'm seeing this, like, you are an incredibly visually beautiful woman. What could possibly be more threatening than someone as stunning and brilliant as you to this like patriarchal? No, I'm serious. And I think it's worth talking about, because there are women who would be in your position and in your space and trying to do this work who might diminish their physicality or might try to diminish themselves in some way to become more palatable. But your response and just like watching you and your expression, I'm like, whoa, she's taking up the space, and that's the only way to do it. And I feel the authority in that. And I feel very similarly to the way that you feel. Like, I look at what's happening collectively and I'm like, oh, patriarchy is fighting for its life. It's begging, it's pleading, like it's on its hands and knees, babe. Like, it's trying everything it can. And for you to be such I'm imagining you with like your shoe, like your heel on patriarchy's neck. Like, there's nothing more threatening.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right there.
Yeah, exactly. Like, there's nothing more threatening. And so, I do want to talk about the way that you feel so inclined to speak out about the male bias that exists within science and the ways that bias has influenced the way that society perceives or even misunderstands the female body. Like, I recently, and I'd love to know if you happen to know if this is true, but I recently saw this circulating that the main study performed on endometriosis was actually performed on male partners of female bodied people who experience endometriosis. Like, as you were talking about it, like, the research that exists is laughable. Like, I feel like it's a common conversation that men struggle to know the mysteries of the female body, but have they really even tried to understand them or figure it out? So I'd love to talk more about that male bias that you're coming up against and how you're finding ways to circumvent it to get toward truth.
Okay. Yeah. So
big question.
Yeah, it is. It's a big question, and we need to confront it, because so there are reasons for this. It is more expensive to study the female body, and it takes longer. It takes a more advanced methodology, which means you really need to know, like, okay, is she in her reproductive years? Can this person become pregnant? Are they pregnant? Are they postpartum? Are they in the perimenopausal stage? Or are they postmenopausal? We need to consider all these factors. And then with the fluctuation of hormones, how are you measuring that? How do you have an approach where you can, really parse that out and name that? So that takes a lot of skill. That takes a lot of resources, and that takes time. None of which Western, corporate backed science cares about. And so the male bias is kind of formally naming that and saying that in a lot of this research that is out there that says the body, the body this, the body needs that, they are talking about the male body unless they specify we researched, the female body, the female brain in this phase, because we have several phases throughout our life. Unless they specify that, they didn't. And we need to know that, and we need to name that, because when we think of what it means to be healthy, or chronic illnesses and conditions that happen throughout the lifespan, we need to think about the ways that having a uterus, having ovaries, having a female brain, and existing as a feminized person in society impacts all of that. And so when we gaslight women and we tell them, oh yeah, your birth was so difficult because, your uterus fatigued, and you're going through postpartum depression because of you, there's something wrong with you. Or, women also experience like nearly 100% more neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, dementia, epilepsy. This has to do with our female brain, but we're not researching our bodies because it costs more, because it requires more skill. And so I just want every woman, anyone who loves and relates to women and feminized people to know that, we're at a major disadvantage here, because our bodies aren't being considered, and then we're being challenged to be more like the male body, which you cannot force a circle to be like a line. Like you're flattening the complexity that's there. And so I want women to know that we need to name the male bias. I'm going to keep mentioning this as much as I need to until it becomes kind of household recognized. We need to ask ourselves, were women even a part of this study? And when we are being studied, like you mentioned about that study about endometriosis, from which perspective is our body being studied? As a nuisance, as a hindrance, as unequipped, as too much? We need to, and that's like the ontology, like that's the philosophy behind the science. And that's what I really try to get to in my work. And the really, really great, beautiful news is that we can overcome that when we build a relationship to our bodies. And so that means every single day, you need to ask yourself, how do I feel? How did I sleep? Did I have dreams? What is my mood like? And what do I feel like in my body? Along those lines. And as you start to document that day after day after day after day after years, your cyclical relationship to time. And you can understand, okay, so, they say that to be a successful person, you need to do the same thing every single day. But why would I do that if when I'm ovulating, I'm extra social and outward? And when I'm luteal, I'm way more brainy. Like I want to learn things. I want to be inside. I want to be in the nest. Why would I do this every day? I wouldn't. I would take advantage of my cyclical design. And you can only learn that when you build that relationship to your body. So the male bias is there. It exists. It will be there until we have a revolution in science and really realize, we need to change the way that we do this. And you cannot shake somebody who has a real deep embodied sense of who they are. And we can develop that. No one's going to give us that. We develop that through our own relationship, and it's available. It takes time. It takes practice, but it's worth it.
I want you to know that every word you say feels like slam poetry to my soul. Like every word you're speaking, I'm like, more of these words. Like I want more of this, which is great because I have more questions to ask you.
Good.
So, one of the things I really would love to understand is in your doctoral research, you've woven together the history of science, the female nervous system, and the female orgasm. And I'm curious, where are we finding the threads of connection or the disconnects that you're having to like build bridges between? Where are you finding that you're just getting like potentially obstructed, or where are you starting to find information that you might not have expected that connects those different sort of areas of the intersectionality of your work?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I get this question a lot too, like what fields are you pulling from? And I work with whatever I can that's going to inform the way science is performed, the way science is done. So I look at like the philosophy of like obstetric science. Like here's a factoid. The first book that was ever written in gynecology was written in a book that was binded in human female skin. Okay, so those men, we don't know where that came from or who did it, but those men who were writing about the female form being kind of this inverted male form and being like a decaying, degenerative form of the male body, they wrote this philosophy in a book bound in a woman's skin. Okay, so that's like the philosophy behind the science. Those are like the beliefs that are there that I try to parse out so we can see that science is not this like neutral, objective like entity. It is created by the people who perform the science and are committed to what they're doing. And Helen King is a historian and she wrote about that, if you want to look into that. So I work with whatever's available, and there is a plethora, but what's not available is this intuitive felt sense that we have, the way that we know what we know. Like Western academic, intellectual knowledge production, they're very, very bad at that. Like it's very challenging to be like, no, I know it because my grandmother knew it and she taught me and I embody it and I know it in my bones. And it's how my people evolved to get here. Like, that's how I know. And they would say like, oh, well, that's not objective. That's not like neutral knowledge. Right. So I challenge that within my work to say, okay, so would I expect these white European men to know my body better than I, or to provide any evidence of what the female orgasm is if they don't have that anatomy? Would I expect that to be there? So I pose these kind of like questions to really, bring us to think about what we assume to be true about the female body. And for instance, like during birth, there's this assumption that you're just supposed to like push down on like tensed up tissues. And nowhere within that philosophy or within that approach do they talk about the role of the clitoris and the female orgasm. The female orgasm is absent from Western birth. Like they don't think about it. Probably because the men who developed that science don't understand the female orgasm. Like they will never have one. And so, there's this way to kind of think about what's missing because it's not embodied. And I try to think about that in different ways. Like there is research that's available, but you have to be very critical about the way that research was produced. Like the first time that the female orgasm was measured and studied, and we realized that it happened inside the uterus. The uterus is undulating like a jellyfish. There are moral and ethical issues with that research that happened like in the 60s, masters, but I'm still going to use components of it. So in a lot of ways, it's kind of like a patchwork like approach to this work. And I also think like my mentors, they're both trained in, history of science at Harvard. So they're very, very traditionally trained. And yet they kind of supported me to be more creative. They were like, we need that. Like you need to challenge these rigid like rules. Like we crave it. We're just like dying for it. So, take my word for it that a part of getting a PhD is also standing on firm ground and saying, I have studied this long enough to tell you this is the problem that I see. And this is the best path forward, period. And take it or leave it. But that's kind of like the path of the PhD, is like you have to really be able to look at what's available, read it, sit with it, let it transform you, and then approach it again and say, okay, like, what can I offer that is going to move us forward? And the more you do that, like, I just really realized that you just realize everything's imperfect. Like, how much work it takes to go into a book, or like, even an interview, or like the work that you do, like, that you just have to work with what you have, and you just have to like give it a go. and it's never going to be perfect. And so I feel frustrated by that sometimes, but I also just feel like, that's the beauty of it. That's the mystery of it.
It's like frustrating to listen as a woman who wants this information and like wants you to be able to be furthered in this research and this information and this gathering, because it feels so imperative and important. And in every place you're highlighting where the philosophy doesn't support truth, or where the research doesn't support truth. And even as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, okay, well, we started this conversation around, and you've brought up as well, like your own ancestral and cultural ties and experiences, and thinking about how that knowledge has also been erased and is missing, because not only were women not adequately observed or studied or listened to, but certainly not Indigenous women or women of color or women that were brought here as slaves, or there was no area where like even like whiteness is so centered in like this work, it feels like. And how do we like decenter that to be able to really explore what is universally true for women and what is demographically true about women, to get a deeper understanding of what is actually true. It feels, as an absolutely like raging radical feminist, I'm finding myself like so inspired by everything you're talking about, and also so deeply frustrated by what little it feels like you have to actually work with, and how much you're having to create, and how much you're having to discover and uncover, and all the steps that will need to be taken by people that come after you. Like, your information, what you're researching and discovering, will inform future female scientists. But like, for you today as a female PhD candidate, what little you have to work with makes me just infuriated. And I don't know how you have found this like calm, I wouldn't say acceptance, but understanding of like what is available and how you can work with it, and like choosing to work with it and not just being angry. Like, I'm really sitting with that in this moment, and I'm wondering like what that feels like for you.
Oh, yeah. I think I'm not quick to anger. I think that anger can be kind of blinding sometimes. And maybe it's because I'm a Taurus moon. I don't know. But
we love that about you.
Yeah, I just feel more empowered than disempowered. And I think that comes back to embodied knowledge. You cannot convince me otherwise. I'm kind of not the perfect researcher, because I know deep in my heart and in my body what the female body, the maternal body, is capable of. I'm not out there like, oh, I don't know, like, surprise me. This research says this research says that. I'm like, no, I know. And I need to find a way to also challenge what I know and deepen it. And find ways that, some assumptions I'm making can be kind of like further parsed out, and they're actually much deeper and much more complex and nuanced. And I am not very easily like shaken. I'm kind of just more like, I just feel like what I know it runs so deep that I don't see my dissertation as like this project where I need to prove it to people, or where I need to like, make a miracle happen or anything like that. People who are ready to kind of deepen in their relationship to their body and want to venerate the female form, they'll hear me. And people who who don't, like, there's nothing that I could do to convince them otherwise anyways. So it's a delicate balance, but I just feel, well, first of all, I also prioritize myself and I nourish myself deeply, and I don't show up to my work unless I am. So when I come from that place, I give what I can, and I'm curious and I have fun, and it's really about having fun. And then I just I don't feel limited. I actually feel like I have everything I need. I feel like it's going to take time and there's no rush. And I always say, like, I'll be doing this. This will be my life. Like, this is my life's work. So I don't feel rushed. I just feel like, the point is to be transformed through the process. The point is to find pleasure in it. The point is to meet myself and soften into it. And the more I do that, the more I'm like, oh my God, doors are opening. Exactly what I was looking for is popping up. Exactly who I wanted to speak to. Like, she's here. She has the work that I need. Like, I'm finding all of these resources because I don't approach my work like, I need to force something. I just approach it like it's coming through me, but it's not me. It's a much deeper, like, being that is coming through this little human body.
I'm so glad I asked that question, because I do feel like even the response was very grounding for me. It was like, you know what? Yeah, like, there is no rush. I think, living today as a female bodied being with hormone issues and things that I wish people could understand better to help me with, there's parts of me that are like, why is this so limited? But at the same time, like, anything that you can add to this conversation in your lifetime is so invaluably important. And so I am all about it. Like, take your time, take your time, find the pleasure in it, find the joy in it. And I'm also hearing something that feels really important. And I'm so curious to see the way that this will continue to evolve in your work. But it sounds as though you're quite intuitively led. Like, the process is sort of unfolding the steps in front of you as you seek it with curiosity and joy. And so I'm really excited to hear about how, and you don't have to have this answer today, but like, as I continue to be a fan and a follower of your work and what you do, to see where you're able to acknowledge like intuition's place in research, because I think it is important, and I think it's always existed. I think intuition is curiosity, and curiosity is intuition, and so it's what furthers us forward. But it sounds like you're saying you're quite intuitively led in your process, and that it does in fact lead you to really important places. Am I hearing you correctly?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, absolutely. You can't like plan this out. You can't. I remember in phases of my doctoral research where you needed to create a plan. I was like, no, I can't plan it. Like, it's going to come. Like, I cannot plan this stuff. And when I did plan it out, by the time I got to that phase, it was like 10 times more elaborate and deeper and complex than anything I could have planned for. So yeah, I am a very intuitively led person. I just feel like it's not, the more we kind of try to like force something, we're just like narrowing our view, and we're not able to access all of the other resources that want to support us. They want to lead us. And oftentimes they want to lead us to something that is much, much greater than what we have committed to and have decided is what we want. And so, but I really think I learned that through my own experience with chronic illness. It is such a deep, that is one hell of a teacher. And it forced me to submit. I had to surrender, and I had to accept that, I needed to go through the experience and not try to numb myself or dissociate and not experience what I was actually going through. And I think coming back to like embodied knowledge, like going through that, I know something about how, I can open up and be led, as opposed to like trying to force an outcome. Every time I've tried to force an outcome, like it did not go well. So I just said, it's okay.
Knowing your like the content of your research and your approach toward it, it feels so symbiotic. Like I feel like, I mean, one of the things I wanted to ask you about is pleasure and like women's pleasure and the idea that you explore your work through your own pleasure, like what brings you joy to pursue, like where you feel intuitively led. And I think this conversation, there's so many parallels I'm seeing between what you're doing and how you're doing it, which I think is why you're getting where you're going and where you're getting to. So I would love to ask you about pleasure, because when it comes to women's pleasure, there is still so much confusion and conditioning, especially for women and femmes and those with wombs. So I'm curious if you can talk to us about some of the myths that you are kind of finding to be erroneous, the places where you're finding that there's information still to be perceived and acknowledged. Like, what are some of the myths that you're busting and the truths that you're finding?
Oof, yeah. Okay, so the first myth is that pleasure is a luxury. It is not. Pleasure is a physiological necessity for the female nervous system. We need it every single day. And I'm not talking about like self-care or like another shiny gadget, another thing to do or buy. I'm talking about the embodied state that you are in when you feel pleasure, and the way that that communicates to your nervous system, your brain, your body, your organs, your tissues, that you are safe. We need that every single day. It's not a luxury. It's not something you earn. It's not something you get to have on a vacation or a holiday or the weekend. It's not something that depends on somebody else. Your nervous system, your entire reproductive cycle from menstrual to, follicular ovulation, the entire seasons that we go through needs oxytocin. It's what makes everything function more smoothly. And it's, again, what communicates to us that we're safe on an embodied level, which allows our body to slowly come out of survival states. So that is the first thing and I say it all the time, pleasure is not a luxury. It is a necessity. And it is so important that we build a relationship to pleasure. And a part of doing that is working through our shame. We have a lot of shame around pleasure, around sensuality, our bodies, and we all know why. Like there's so many reasons for that. And so working with our shame is going to allow us to create more room for pleasure in our lives. And shame is so persistent and sticky, and it like binds to other emotions, and it can be a driver for a lot of us. We play to not fail. We don't necessarily play for the joy of it and to expand and to grow. And a lot of people are living in that cycle, in that embodied state. So it makes it really hard to build an intentional relationship to pleasure. And I completely understand that. And I've totally been there. And when we start to kind of really think about the female body, and I know, male and female, we exist on a spectrum, and there's no need to kind of create these like rigid boundaries. And the goalpost of like what constitutes a male and what constitutes a female has changed throughout time. And yet, if you're dealing with, if you have a uterus, if you are menstruating, if you have ovaries, we need to really think about what is distinct about us. And when we look at that form, when you look at the clitoris, like below the skin, the tissues and the uterus and the ovaries and the entire pelvic diaphragm, you start to see that there's this incredible design that's there, that's present. And we just haven't had the opportunity, the encouragement, the space, the resources, you name it, to really delve into that. And we don't really necessarily need anybody else to get us there. When you can start to build a relationship to your body, and slowly, I tell people like, sometimes this is all the pleasure that you can withstand. Just this. That is enough to get started. especially if you're living in like a chronically dysregulated state, or if you're dealing with like a lot of chronic shame, like this might be too much, but that's okay. Slowly we can build into this like deeper embodied praxis. And ideally, we'll get to a point where we can actually build a relationship to our cervix, to our uterus, to our clitoris deep below the tissues and everything else in between, and that takes time. But I definitely want people to know, we think of pleasure in this like Western capitalist society, like it's something you buy or it's something you earn at the end of the work week, or that if you indulge in too much pleasure that you'll become like weak or something. But I think that's a total misconception of what pleasure actually is in an embodied way. And when you start to build a relationship to that, you can weave it into everything that you do. And then it kind of transforms the way that you experience yourself. And it's no longer just this theoretical, intellectual thing. It's actually how you are. It's like your beingness. And that's when pleasure starts to really work on our physiology. And you start to transform at a much deeper level than just like, I'm going to say affirmations in the mirror and like force this like new identity. The identity shift actually happens in our body, like in our tissues through pleasure.
I could seriously have this conversation all day long. I feel like your brain is just this fount of wisdom of all that you've collected through, your academic career. And actually, I was introduced to your work through a video on TikTok, and this got me so excited. It's something I definitely want to ask you about in our time together. The video that I saw was about menopause and matriarchy. And I was wondering if you could share what that connection means to you and how it redefines the way that we see the role of women in human evolution and leadership. Because I think this question feels really important in the way that, to me, what I'm hearing as you're speaking is like, wow, with more space for women in science, in medicine, in leadership, we could have more information and more answers and more clarity and more pleasure and more all sorts of things. And so I'm curious if you can talk about matriarchy and menopause, because it was like a mind-blowing moment for me. And then I was just like, how do I consume more? How do I learn more? How do I get to have a conversation with this person?
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Zoe. So matriarchy really interests me. And I think it's because it's such a polarizing concept for a lot of people. And I always say, like, we cannot truly understand matriarchy from within the patriarchy. Like you can't see it from where we're standing. But that's actually the last chapter of my dissertation. I kind of go towards this question about matriarchy. And when you look for matriarchy, like in traditional academic literature, there's no signs of it. And the one person who I have found who did a tremendous amount of work, Marisha Gimbutas, she spoke like 16 languages and she did this tremendous amount of work. She was completely discarded. They were just like, oh, we're not even going to engage her work. So it just really goes to show you, even if you move the mountain, it doesn't mean that information and that knowledge is going to be integrated into the mainstream discourse. It likely won't be. It can't be. But you know what? That doesn't really matter when our bodies tell the story anyways. Do I really need a book on the shelf to tell me that matriarchy, or a society in which caregiving, child rearing, caring for elders, any kind of like mutual support and that kind of labor of caring and supporting others and children are at the center? Do I really need a book to tell me that existed in our evolution if our body indicates that? And I think that menopause indicates that. And also the fact that every single baby, Every baby is born in deep, deep need to have affection with their mother. You would not survive, nobody would survive if you did not have the love and affection of your mother or a primary caregiver. But even if it's not your actual birthing person, like the mother who birthed you, your nervous system will be compromised, unfortunately. And so what that tells us is that that relationship, the mother baby dyad, is actually how we evolved into the deeply social beings that we are. Like mammal actually refers to the ability to breastfeed and give birth. So I don't really need like a book to tell me if matriarchy has existed or the role of like menopause or anything like that. When you start to see like these different periods in our life as like initiations that we move through and that all of us rely on, you start to really see how whether we live in a matrifocal like matriarchy society today or not, our bodies deeply yearn for it. We deeply yearn for connection. And even when people try to distort that and be like, oh no, it's the male loneliness epidemic because like women don't want to be married. Yeah, and what's at the root of that? Connection. And who is primed for that? The female nervous system. Like it's so like glaringly obvious. It's just not present in like the traditional, academic approach. Like you're not going to really find that in archaeology or the evolutionary sciences or, the traditional historical archive. Like you're not going to find that. And that's kind of what I'm coming up against. But I'm like, I also kind of don't need that because it's in our bodies. So let's just kind of step out of the dogma and like let's expand our view and let's start to really like reframe the way that we see these initiations, like our first bleed, becoming pregnant and postpartum, that sacred postpartum window, menopause especially, like that is such an initiation. That is, and it's so sad to me that in society we're shamed about it and it's just about like aging and like not being appealing to men anymore, when actually like that is when a woman is so deep in her power that, when we start to really think about like the lifespan, I look forward to menopause. I'm like, dude, those are going to be my best years. Those are going to be the years where like I can like fully integrate everything that I've been through and that I know and that I want to be passed on to the next generation.
Can you speak to that? Like, what is the power of menopause? How can we reframe our understanding of it?
So we stop reproducing, right? Like we stop having that reproductive window. And so we're kind of like going through this total nervous system rewiring. And that's why it can be kind of challenging, especially if, your nervous system has been like low level dysregulation throughout your life or you've dealt with chronic illness. Like that transition can just be kind of really rocky. But of course, oxytocin benefits that and supports that. So we want to have a relationship to pleasure. But either way, like your whole body is being primed to transition from caring about the like others, the role of estrogen, and caring about like caregiving and like providing for others and like child rearing into kind of a more like focused view on who you are, what you need, what you're here to contribute, and speaking truth to power. Like that's really who you're transitioning into. And that can be really challenging. Like that can be really hard because you're kind of letting go of, who you were. And it's kind of like a death and a rebirth. I mean, it truly is. But again, when we can reframe it as this initiation into a new phase of life, and we can remove the shame that's on top of it, and we can start to really see how, oh my God, I'm stepping into another phase of my life that has a really distinct purpose. And what I've acquired is intended to be passed on. Like, that's actually why I'm transitioning. You can kind of start to see how menopause is this really, really beautiful window. I mean, it's incredible. It's just, it makes sense, the phases that we go through and why we would arrive at that period and why that period is so crucial to future generations. And that's why we need to preserve it and we need to honor it and we need to really think about it and plan for it. We need to like really think about like, how can I serve my nervous system right now so that when I go through that transition, it's as smooth as possible and I'm not like at risk for, say, like a hysterectomy, something like that.
Again, I feel like I have 1,000 questions. I could ask you questions all day long, which actually brings me to my next question about your upcoming course. Can you tell me a little bit about what you're creating, what the inspiration was for it, how you're bringing it into the world, and what you're bringing into the world?
Yeah. So I am developing a course called Pleasure is Praxis. And so Praxis is more than just a practice. It's like the doing through something where you actually become transformed. So that's what like building a praxis is. And so it's supposed to be this like full introduction into my methodology, my research, everything I've gathered, but it's also supposed to support women to develop their own praxis. So their own relationships to their body, their pleasure, their cyclicality, their shame, digesting that shame, and really kind of merging what science does have to offer, but also this other embodied way of knowing. And really finding that, we don't need this rigid binary between the two. We can kind of weave a path through both. And yeah, I'm really excited about it. I'm working on it now. It should be out like early 2026. But in the meantime, I have like a one-on-one coaching experience. It's a little bit smaller. It's called Cycle and Soma. And it's meant for women who want to work like one-on-one and want to kind of just be really supported exactly where they are. So dealing with like endometriosis or PCOS or just, kind of chronic crippling shame or like burnout. I work with a lot of like really high achieving women who just have it all, but they feel really unsafe in their body. So there's that offer to kind of work really closely, but I want to create something that is just like more accessible and just more like, far reaching than I know, like, academic work is. Like academic work is just so like in a little bubble and just like, full of jargon. And it's just not like really reaching the hearts of people. So that's what that course is supposed to be about. And it's supposed to kind of initiate women into having this intentional relationship to their body and to start to like really reframe their relationship to pleasure too.
I am so inspired by the work that you do. I'm so inspired by the places you're willing to go, the questions you're willing to ask, the embodied, thorough, peaceful approach through which you approach it. And I just have to say, I genuinely think one of the things I love to do is bring people onto the show that I think are going to change the future, like that are already changing the world and are going to change the future. People that I identify as pioneers, people that maybe, in the future will look back at their work and see its impact more than we can in like the microcosm of a human lifespan. But I truly, genuinely believe that you are one of those people. And I would love if you could tell us where people can wait to find out about your course, where they can access the one-on-one coaching opportunities with you. Where can people remain connected to you? Because I know after this, you've got fans. Like there are people that are listening to this that are already in love with you. So tell us, where can they follow? Where can they learn? Where can they work with you? Where can they connect?
Well, Zoe, first of all, I have to say thank you to you for having this really awesome project and bringing people together. We need people who are kind of like weaving the thread and bringing us together to make these connections and to kind of slow down. And so I really appreciate you, and I've had such a great time. So thank you for what you do. Yeah. And I'm only on TikTok right now at Pleasure as Praxis. And right there, you can go to my link in bio, and I have everything. I also have quarterly free live webinars, so you can kind of deep dive there with me. But Cycle and Soma is there, and then you can get on my newsletter, and you'll hear about when the course is out, and it'll be out early 2026.
I cannot thank you enough for the time together today, for the connection that we've formed in this time together, for your wisdom and your work and all the ways that you move through the world toward deeper levels of truth. And I would love to invite you back to dive even more deeply into what you're doing and to do a demonstration, or like, I feel like my community needs to experience you. So I would definitely say this is not our last connection together. And I'm getting already some divine downloads about ways that we can bring this medicine into the world. So I just want to thank you again for being here and for all the ways that you are truly illuminating a path toward deeper levels of wisdom and autonomy and authenticity in ways that I think most of us don't even know that we need to be looking for. Like, your curiosity is carving such a unique path on collective consciousness that I think truly can never be erased. So thank you so much for what you do.
Thank you so much. You're so sweet. And I would love that. I would love to come back. I was thinking it would be so cool if we do a demo, but we'll save that for next time.
Honestly, I wanted to get to it, but there was so much for us to discuss today that I'm like, okay, wow. So there you go, blessed babes. There you have it. And thank you for tuning in for another episode. And let us know in the comments what you would like to hear Verónica come back to talk about, because I feel like we have some even deeper levels of things to discuss and some experiences that we might be able to facilitate for you guys to have. So thank you again for tuning in for another episode. And I would love if we could take a moment to send this week's subject, Verónica, some love, sweetness, and positivity as she continues to forge a path forward in a male-dominated world, so that we can understand ourselves, our pleasure, our bodies, and our purpose even more deeply. If you're interested in being on the podcast, you guys know what to do. Send an email to podcast@zoegreco.com. Connect with me on all socials at @thezoegreco. And of course, I want to conclude by reminding you that you are important. You matter, and you are perfect exactly as you are. I love you. Your spirit guides love you. Verónica loves you. And the universe loves you. So until next time, keep answering the call of your higher self and get some pleasure in your life. Bye, friends. Take us back, Mike. Hi, Mike. That's my editor. I always like to say hi to Mike.
I thought you were talking to your mic.
Hi, Mike. So good to see you again. That's hilarious. Sorry. Back up, Mike.